and just hope that the remarks that have been made repeatedly is that this is just the beginning, that we will now have a European Speciation conference on a regular basis, not just within Prospects, but in the future to come. And as part of the Prospects Steering Committee, I can say that we are very proud of this meeting. And as Ulf had indicated before, the idea after the workshop in Hólar, where we started touching upon this idea of where we are at in speciation research and as it relates to evolutionary studies in general, the idea then came up also to write a kind of a perspective paper, and so I've been sort of collecting ideas along those lines, and certainly this has for me and for all of us been a major food for the brain to spend these exciting 3 days here in this conference. And I think I would just start by, also for the sake of simplicity, but also because I think we also all agree on it, and we have to realize that what has been changing greatly is the entrance of ecology to evolutionary studies and to especially studies of evolution. And as has been repeatedly emphasized here, Darwin is, of course, has arrived again. Darwin didn't know much about genetics, but he knew a lot about ecology. And Darwin was also a process thinker. And he thought in an integrated way. And I think we can all be proud to say that we are doing that. And this conference, to me, was complete confirmation of that this is happening. And of course, we know a lot about genetics now, as we heard, just learned. So I'll still start by very briefly sort of emphasizing a few things that are clearly of importance and coming through in this meeting to me. And first of all, I'll just mention this very strong emphasis on the comparative approach, especially the geographic comparison within species, among populations, morphs, and varieties. And notice also that this scale of this is quite variable. We are looking at comparative studies on a very small, fine scale and up to a very large scale. And I think that is a new thing. And of course, it has to do with this entrance of ecology. And the fact that we, even though we know a lot about ecology, we don't know enough. And we need to learn much more about it. And that, of course, culminates in our ideas of disruptive selection, frequency, and density-dependent selection, but especially disruptive selection. And the way it has repeatedly been mentioned here, when does it occur? And at what stage does that disruptive selection start to influence isolation, and so forth. And of course, this has a lot to do with population dynamic aspects in general, but it also leads to detailed questions and integrated questions on the importance of genetics and plasticity and those sort of more internal developmental mechanisms of how diversity comes about. And we've had very good examples of all of this here, especially now. I'm under influence of the last section, obviously, talking about this wonderful information that these extremely great genetic techniques are now allowing us to learn about how traits come about and how selection can operate on these traits to develop both the adaptive patterns and also the critical patterns of isolation that may lead to speciation. I don't want to be too long here, but I also wanted to highlight that in the Hólar workshop, we had a long conversation at the end where phenotypic plasticity and its importance in the general sense and in the integrated sense became a really key issue. Right? It was not just a bias of the attendance. It was something that we obviously are very much aware of as something that needs to be explored in a much more deeper fashion, and it's obviously being explored. And along with these genetic issues that I just mentioned. And you have to, of course, start thinking about also very carefully about issues of how the intra-species diversity morphs and individuals are actually making decisions on what to do. What habitats to exploit, what food to eat, and whether that relates to plasticity or something else. And this, of course, is often put in the context of the issue of generalism and specialism. But what has perhaps been most, I think, and I have to make those statements, sorry for the generalization, that what has maybe been highlighted here as a debate or as a very important area to identify and explore more further is how selection is causing isolation, reproductive isolation. And to make a long story short, I really think that the magic trait, that great concept, whether people like the terminology or not, has been repeatedly emphasized here. And of course, it is maybe, philosophically speaking, combining also the kind of issues of just, let's say, classical adaptive divergence versus this critical role of isolation, which I'm sort of saying that the role of isolation at different stages of adaptive divergence has now been really emphasized here. And I think this is a question, and the unanswered question is, when and how does isolation come into the picture, especially with regard to local divergence? And of course, the geographic issues are extremely important as well. So again, why is this possible? It's possible because of the process-oriented thinking. It is quite real that it is allowing us to ask those kinds of questions. And again, what is the most pressing problem here, in my opinion? It is ecology. It is the ecology of how ecology is causing the isolation. And I think that's just an observation. But then, a little bit more about what I would identify also as sort of even more general, as important contributions of this meeting is, and I think this is very much related to the objective of the Prospects project and of this conference, and that is this great dialogue that has occurred here between theoretical modeling people and empirical scientists. And I think this is something very, very important and relatively rare in our field today. So this should be something we should consider, how we, the empiricists, can learn to sort of understand the complexities of the processes by adapting and connecting with the modelers. And I think I think you all know what I mean. Another aspect is that here we are bringing people together working on all these diverse organisms, all these extreme diverse systems all over the globe. And that is, I think, not so common when we are working in this field. And the third issue that I would like to mention is and this sort of relates to the issue that I highlighted before about the reproductive isolation. It of course involves sexual selection, mate choice, and all those issues, is simply the appreciation of the continuum, of the often sometimes vague distinction and even not necessary distinction between adaptive divergence in general and speciation. That has come up here repeatedly. And I think, to me at least, this indicates that we are valuing the whole process. We are understanding that even very, very vague individual or morph divergence is ecologically, genetically, and geographically important as much as the end product. The pattern-oriented thinking, of course, of species is what I'm saying. We have challenged that. And now we have given the whole process a much more value, and it gives us an opportunity to develop our research much further. So now we are not shy of making statements and doing studies on things we call incomplete speciation, reversed speciation, or even no speciation. Holy, sorry about that. But in a speciation conference, it's interesting to hear somebody say, well, I can present a talk here about speciation. It says that this is not speciation. So it just shows how our thinking is developing. Now, this was a bit of a philosophical remark. I mentioned small and large-scale studies, and of course, what has been highlighted here as well is the great importance of communication with managers and with conservationists or ecologists. One way we put it, another, both to both to emphasize extinction patterns and global trends in our environment, and not the least also to explain to these people that variation occurs at different levels, and that variation occurs in a process fashion, where species are generated and not just exist as units. I think you all know what I mean. And this is something that we have great responsibility to communicate. Now, I just very briefly want to mention what maybe we did not discuss here, in my opinion. And that is, first of all, and this is just pulled out of a hat, is that we are not really talking very much about macroevolutionary patterns. It is not much about fossils or those sorts of issues. So maybe that is the problem with the process thinking, that we get too kind of integrated into our thinking about processes and tend to forget a little bit about the very big picture. So I think in the future we'll see more of this. And secondly, the question, and I'm biased here, is this question of why are some organisms more diverse than others? And why are some organisms speciating more rapidly than others? I think we need to think about that question. That would be my take-home question. And finally, something that I believe will come into the prospects maybe in 2013 is, and again my bias, a more philosophical consideration of what we actually mean, for example, by this process ontology versus substance ontology, that we are obviously we are members of this philosophical issue here today. And maybe that sounds like a big question mark for what I actually mean by saying this. But I think we will see more philosophical issues brought into the speciation research. And as the emphasis of Darwin and all of that has pointed out to us, we should relate what we're doing also maybe even more strongly to the history of science, and how maybe we are part of that. And so finally, all culminates in my mind in the concept of complexity. And somebody here said, and several people have said, that we need to see the world as it is. We need to, and to do so, we need to open our eyes to the complexity of everything. Because otherwise, we will ask the wrong questions. And we will ask too complicated questions if we don't embrace the complexity. So, and I think we've seen it in this conference, especially if you look at the posters and all the work that the students here have contributed, is that we're seeing detailed questions and hypotheses about, in many cases, very limited part of the whole picture we want to understand. But these are good questions. They are the right questions. And that is because we appreciate the complexity of things. And of course, by doing so, we also make our field and our contribution much more important and more valuable for society. That relates to issues of sustainability and resilience and you know, all the things that the world is now faced with, where the concept of biological diversity is at it's at the core of that discussion. It's the most value-labeled concept for the future of humanity, if you like. So maybe I should not get any further with that. But remember, prospects means frontiers of speciation research. So I think we should all give applause to us and the frontiers of speciation research. Thank you very much.